Hi guys, it's Blakey for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft. Okay, enough of you have asked me and wanted me to do the 1858 Remington breakdown, so that's what I'm going to do. Now this is commonly called the 1858 Revolver. Actually it's the Remington New Model Army. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take you in on the bench and we're going to do a detailed strip and tune of this like I've done, like I did for the Colt. So stay with me, be right back. Okay guys, now in here at my workbench, we're going to do the detail strip and detail working of the 58 Remington, or New Model Army is what it really is. A couple of tools you're going to need. You're going to need proper fitting screwdriver, a tin of some kind to put the screws in, your files or whatever you're going to be adjusting with, getting rid of burrs, sandpaper of some form. You may need other little dowels or widgets. It just depends on what we're going to need. Okay, to begin with, we're going to take the cylinder out, making sure the gun is unloaded. Bring the hammer to half cock, drop, pull, drop out the cylinder, set the cylinder to the side. Now we're going to drop out the rammer, taking the proper size screwdriver. We're going to remove this screw right here and to take out the loading lever. Move the screw, slide out the loading lever, put the screw back. Remember my first video, I'm a big fan of always putting the screw back. That can be put back and you don't want to lose it. Now on the full length barrel, this is a sheriff's model, this base pin comes out. On the sheriff it does not. It hits the catch up here and you would have to take the barrel catch to get this off, and we're not going to mess with that right now. So just leave it in place, it doesn't hurt anything. Now, making sure this one has a pin that goes through right here. This should be free flowing, free moving. It usually is. A little oil or grease on this bearing point right here is very handy, so you may want to sand that just a little bit if it's tight and it's wanting to bind up. This one is very free flowing, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay, now grip screw. We'll take out the grip screw. Pull it out. And these grips can be, like this one, fairly tight. So I like to take my fingernail and get down here at the edge and just gently lift it up a little. You don't want to bust it off there or chip anything. But like this, mine are very tight fitted. So I just come down here at the corners and take my fingernails and give it a little pull, and you'll start working it off the frame like that. Once you get one side off, you can just take your finger and pop out the other side. Now put the screw back into the grips. Put the grips to the side. Now, here in front is a trigger screw, is a mainspring screw. I want to take that loose now, just a couple of turns. And take my fingers and gently remove it. Okay, set it with my tin. Let me go ahead and get my tin set up. I like to use a little tin or something to keep my screws organized so they don't get rolled off of the deck or something. Turning underneath, now I'm going to remove the screw that holds in the trigger guard. Lift off the trigger guard, set the trigger guard aside, put the little screw back. Now what we're going to be faced with here looks a lot like the Colt trigger group because it's got the same idea of a single flat spring powering a bolt and a hand. And I'll give you a close-up of that just so I get the screw in there good, so it's not going to fall out and get lost. Okay. Now, here's your large screw. Here's your trigger bolt spring. We're going to take that out now. And this one I want. Okay, now we're going to take out that trigger spring, bolt spring, so we're going to change to the bigger tip so we don't bugger up them screws. Alright, got that screw out. Now out will come the trigger screw, the bolt spring. This is the bolt and trigger spring. Now I'm going to put that screw back into position so I don't lose it. One of the reasons I'm so anal about these screws is they're a unique type of screw. They are not something to go down to the hardware store and just pick up a screw that fits this thread. It's very fine machine thread. So if you lose one of these little suckers, you're going to probably be a week or so down till you get another screw in from a retailer. Okay, now laying the gun sideways, I'm going to let the hammer down all the way. And I'm now going to take out the trigger screw. This one, you change back to the finer tip. This one will hold both the trigger and the bolt in place. The Colt has two of them. The Remington only uses one. Okay. Ease that out. Now you pull out, there's the trigger, and a little turn upside down, little tap, there's the bolt. Trigger, bolt. I'll put those right here. Now, this is the tricky part where a lot of people get a little bit cattywamped with it. We need to push out the mainspring. Now I've removed that screw up front, so the trigger spring, the mainspring is just sitting there by the notch in the back and hooked to the hammer. What I like to do is now take out, changing to the bigger tip again, take out the mainspring screw, which is this big screw right here on the frame. Now put your thumb up here on the top and kind of squeeze a little at the bottom so that when you pull that spring out, that screw out, the mainspring wants to shove it up. So you don't want to bind up on the threads. Take that out. Now I take my thumb and I put on the mainspring, gently tip out the hammer and let it kind of rise up a little. That takes the pressure off of the mainspring. And now I can sit there and take my thumb and push out the mainspring. Okay. Now, turning the gun upside down, we wiggle and slide it inward. On this side, you have another tiny little screw. Now that screw, I need to get out my super fine little tip there. That screw is the hand screw. It is screwed to the bolt. On the Colt, it's on a peg. But due to the solid frame of the Remington, it has to be removable. And out comes the hand and the hand screw. And then the hammer goes out the top of the frame. Now, I'm going to, of course, put that teeny-tiny little screw back into that hammer right quick. Now, all my parts are right here. That is the complete field stripped frame. So now we need to address the tuning aspects. One, is the back of this crowned or is it really rough? If it's badly, marled up in the back of the barrel right here where there's hardly any forcing cone and it's very rough, you may want to hand put in one of the cone Dremel tool fittings and sit there and turn and open that up. Not something you always have to do, but it may require. Okay, now we look inside the frame. In here, there's the channel that the hand rides up and down in. You'll see this on yours. Make sure looking down in there's no big old burr. If there is, we got to remove it. Same thing as in the Colt, inside the cylinder well, right here where the hand comes through. Now this one has a pretty good burr right there. And that burr is going to ride against our side of our hand and cause us problems. So now we go to a file. These little craft files can be picked up at gun shops, things like that. They're available off the internet, etc. And they do a really good job at getting to these tiny little nooks and crannies. Now what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to go in beside into the hand notch right there. I'm going to get rid of that burr, because that burr has been dragging on that hand. There. It's just like a wire edge from the milling process. Now on the inside right here, you have where the hammer comes through the actual frame. Right here. That is where we're going to make sure there's no burrs on this inner surface right here. Because if it does, it'll drag the hammer. We want to look at our hammer face and see if there's any scratches up in here. We also want to look on the sides of the hammer and make sure that the sides of the hammer are not dragging. This one has got a little bit right here, and I'll address that in a second. But what that means is orientating the hammer that on this side there is a burr. And me looking down in here, I can see where it's at. It's actually the edge of the hand channel. So I'm going to take my file and break that wire edge off. Just like that. Now I'm going to shift to a little flat file. Get down in there and smooth it out to remove any burr there. Remember on the back of the Colt, the edge of the frame right here was sharp. This one isn't. In here where the hammer goes, I want to kind of bevel that a little bit and make sure there's nothing there. And also where the base pin comes through, and it does come through. I don't know if I can show you this or not. I'll try. See that right there? That is the actual base pin. See, I move it and it disappears and it comes back. It sticks through the frame. Usually that's not a problem. It's going to be clearanced right in here in the hammer. But occasionally you get one that's a grunt long, and what happens is if you look inside the hammer and you got a spot right here, that's what it's doing. It's hitting the base pin. And that can be eliminated by just, pulling it out and squaring off the back of the base pin just a little bit and give you a little bit more clearance. Now, the hole in the frame right here where the bolt comes in out, we want to take our little round file and we want to file that nice and smooth so there are no burrs to cause that bevel edge to catch. Got a little one right there. Because this is kind of punched out when they manufacture it. And because of that, it can be kind of burred up. Make sure there's nothing there on the inside or the outside that's going to hang up that bolt and cause it to drag and therefore affect timing. Looking down on the inside here in the hand channel like we talked about earlier, make sure there's no burr on any of those edges. there is, run a file down there and straighten it up. Just like that. Okay. Here in the operating hole for where the rammer goes, make sure there's no burr in there. If there is, take your round file, go in there and kind of pull and eliminate it. If you need to, you can take a piece of fine sandpaper and wrap it around a dowel and go in there and just turn it by hand. You want it smooth. Okay? Frame looks good. Now let's turn our attention to the parts. The hammer. We already addressed that scratch was a burr, so I took care of that. Now, on the front face, let me get my pointy one. On the front face of the hammer, you have two notches. This top notch and the lower notch. The top notch is your safety notch. Notice that it is undercut. That allows the trigger to go up and in like that and lock in position so it stays on half cock. The next one is where the trigger actually sits for the full cock position. You're going to pop that off and it's going to run forward. So that's the relationship. It should be a good, easy to get into notch. Run the tip like that of the trigger back and forth, make sure there's no binding, and sit it up there on the actual shelf. Make sure there's nothing that's going to bind it or whatever. Now, this part is hardened. Do not sit here and sand a lot on it. What you do want to do though is take a rag of some kind, and this gun is greased up and ready to go. But you want to remove any oils or grease, take a good look at it, any fouling you got in here. And it's color case hardened. Now if it's got a burr, you can hook with a fingernail, and that one does have just a slight burr right there. I'm going to take a flat file and I'm going to lay it across there, and I'm going to very gently go across it and just break that off. Do not remove metal. Eliminate that burr. Next, I'm going to take some fine sandpaper. Now this is 400 grit. And I'm going to take something soft, in this case a piece of foam, and I'm going to back it with it. I'm going to sit it up there, and I'm going to draw a few strokes like that to kind of polish that face. It's nice and smooth. My full cock notch, I'm going to take and double the paper in half. And I'm just going to put it on that folded edge and roll her back and forth, both on it and the full cock, to make sure that notch is nice and smooth and burr free. A little blow like that gets rid of your dust and therefore keeps it from being a something gritty feeling in there. Okay, that should take care of it. Now, I want you to notice something right here. I hope you can see this. You can't believe how I'm doing this backwards. Okay, here is the cam that works your bolt. Don't adjust that. Here is the half cock notch. Here's the full cock notch. This is the peg for the hand that rides on the side. And right here at the bottom, notice how thin that is between the hole and that notch. Right there, see that? There's a burr. Because when they're milling this thing at high speed, there's quite often right there is a burr. And what that happens is it doesn't do any harm, but it's kind of out in the air. I like to take it, put it on a flat surface, and take a file and not really doing anything, but just do one or two strokes like that, and that burr on the side disappears. Remove the screw that the hand rides on, lay it down in the perfect place so you're not going to lose it. Feel on the other side, same thing. Do you feel a burr? If you do, just a little, and then just take the sandpaper just a little and give it just a little polish on those sides. And I do mean a little. that does it for that. Now, the face of the hammer. Here where it would contact and go up and hit the cap. Bevel this bottom edge, bevel this front edge slightly, just break the wire edge. Don't remove any of the face right here, but just bevel it just a little bit because it fits better. It just seems to work better, and it doesn't peen over as easy if you do that. Because what happens is in the repeated hitting of the cap and etc., you'll start generating a wire burr on this side, and the hammer face will start peening. If you bevel it, it doesn't seem to want to do it as easily. Not meaning it can't do it, but it's just been my experience. It just seems to work better, you know. Okay, now putting that itsy bitsy screw back. We don't want to leave it and forget it. Next, the trigger of the Remington. Clean it, make sure there's nothing on it. Your center hole, is it beveled and burr free? Both sides. If it's not, bevel it a little bit. Do not remove any metal. You do not want the trigger to become sloppy left-right. It needs to be full diameter if possible, so just remove any burrs. This shelf here in the front, right there at the top, that is where the spring hooks, so we'll call it the spring seat. Make sure there's no burr there, because that should be smooth functioning as well. And then this all-important piece right here that sticks up, this is your actual sear. This is what engages the hammer. So I want to take my fine grit sandpaper, and I'm not going to use the 400, I'm going to use the 2000 I've got here. Where do I get that kind of paper, Blackie? Go to your automotives department in Walmart or something like that. It's used for sanding paint. After, you know, you've painted something with like a spray gun, you get what's called orange peel, and this is used for sanding paint. They have it in several grits all the way up to 2000, like 800, etc. I use 2000 for this. And I'm just going to simply hook it with my fingers and kind of roll it on that edge. I'm not removing any metal, I'm just polishing. Okay? So that it nice and fluidly rolls in and out of position. Make sure that the points on the corner are not sticking up. Run your finger over them. If so, take it and kind of angle it and bevel those corners a little bit. Because usually when I see a problem with these, what happens is, for whatever reason, the very thin corners on the edge want to kind of curl a little, and it forms a burr that causes uneven. Also, it can form a burr so when you put it in the full cock notch, it's actually hanging rather than trigger, and it slips out, or it wants to guide it out. So you want those edges nice and 90 degree and ready to go. Okay? The hand. The hand, just like the Colt hand, and these look a lot alike, has a little spring up on top, little top up here at the face. Make sure that there are no burrs anywhere on it. This casting flash down the front doesn't do anything, just make sure there's no raised burr. And make sure that the flat face right here is flat and smooth, because that's going to be riding up against the hammer, just like the outside will be riding. Make sure that this spring is seated in there. Sometimes these springs right here on the actual edge where the spring actually goes into the metal, the spring will kind of be a burr right there. Just get rid of the edge of the spring. Okay, now to make sure this is nice and smooth, on the side that's going to fit to the hammer, that side, I'm going to take my 2000 grit sandpaper, put that side down on it, and give her a little go to polish it. Just like that. And in doing so, you'll see it looks nice and smooth. When you go to doing that, it'll make this model pattern, and that's showing you the high points being shined and the low points not, just as long as it's slick. And that will make it easier sliding on the face of the hammer and sliding in that notch. The bolt. Very simple. Even simpler than the Colt, really. Colt has two hooked prongs and the Remington does not. It's just got these two ears up here. Simply make sure that there are no burrs on the actual hammer face. This part right here is the actual part that goes up and locks in the cylinder. Make sure there's no strong burr sticking up. Don't bevel it a lot because you'll make it too small and it won't fit the notch. So you want to make sure there's just no burrs there. Around the holes that go through it, make sure that that's nice and smooth on both sides. And back here on the back, run your finger over it and make sure those two ears sticking up right there, that they are nice and smooth. Okay? When in doubt, lay it flat and sand it. That's about it, except mainspring. Mainspring should have a nice smooth edge all the way around. If there's a wire edge, take a file and bevel it off. It's thick down here at the base and flat up here at the top. Sometimes when they cut these, the very top, the finger that hooks at the bottom of the hammer can actually be burred a little, so get rid of that. That makes a grainy feel when you go back and forth. Now I like to take, going back to my 400, the top of the mainspring and give it a good polish, because this is actually friction sliding on the bottom of the hammer. I'll show you that in just a second so you get a good polish on it. Okay, now that, now I shift over to my 2000. Now, the back of the hammer has a little roller in it. The hammer sits up into this notch, and when it comes down, that roller is supposed to take care of it, but it's actually sometimes touching the actual hammer body. So I polish that so it doesn't feel grainy. It doesn't, you know, like that. That's something else that you need to just look at on the inside in here where the roller is on the hammer. You know, let me show you the hammer. In here, make sure that roller rolls, and make sure that right here where the roller sits, there's no big old burr or something, because that is a polished surface, so to speak. Okay, trigger, bolt spring is the only thing that's left. Bolt spring. Trigger spring, just make sure it's clean. You can tell I've had this a while and shot it quite a bit, because you'll get discolored in here. This is why you should detail strip a gun every so often. Not every time you go, but certainly when you're going to put the gun up for a long time, because fouling gets down in here from the cloud of ejected gases and stuff. And eventually this spring rusts, or the hand or the trigger spring gets rusty and wants to rust in place, and then you go to cock it and it snaps the spring. So every so often take it apart, clean it, and add a little bit of oil or a little bit of grease. I do not use petroleum-based products in the barrel or in the cylinder, but I will use them down here in the operating parts. I use grease down here for that. Good lithium grease, just a light coating of it. Okay. The loading lever, same as the Colt, these fingers that you grab should be gnarly, but not so much they're going to cut your fingers. So just feel them. If they are a little too sharp, shorten them up. The notch that locks up front, just make sure it's burr-free so it locks in. Up here on the loading notch, make sure that run your fingernails through that notch and make sure that where it locks in, that it is, you know, not gnarled up or burred up so that the locking thing can't get a good purchase on it for the loading lever. Okay. Now, sighting. On this gun, I flat topped the front sight like we did on the Colt. All I did was took a file and flattened it. And unlike the Colt I put the notches across the back. I do not do that with the Remington because the notch in the Remington is a deep U. So what I've done is up here on the front sight, I put two crossbars on the front sight. because that's what Keith was talking about was number 5. He put crossbars on it so that he could regulate the sight up and down by how much front sight he showed. Since this is a fixed sighted where it's a groove in the top like a Colt single action, I put the 2 grooves on the front like Keith talked about. On the percussion Colt where the hammer is the rear sight, I put the bars back here because my front sight and it's easier to see it. I can see those marks with my eyes at arm's length, enough to be a reference to how deep to bury the sight. So I'm only using that top tip at point blank. And there's another marker down there, that's my 15 yard. And then when I bring this bottom one all the way up, so I'm actually seeing the base of the front sight in the notch, I'm at 75 yards. That's the basis of that. Yes, Blackie does have a trick for the Remington. Okay, now, reassembly. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take the hammer. We're going to take out that little bitty screw. We're going to hold it. Now we're going to, sliding in from the top, put the hammer in. Drop it all the way down. Turn the gun over. Now we're going to pick up the hand. Putting the hand in position, swinging it over its little lock. We're now going to put that teensy-tiny little screw into there. Snug it up. Do not make it blood tight. Snug it up. Now, guide the spring in the back. That's the hard part. Okay. Bring the hammer in. Okay, bring the hammer in. And I like, you see this notch here? I put it there in the frame. So I bring it in, I rotate and I set it there. Now I take my hand and put it up in the slot, line up my little screw hole, and drop in that teensy-tiny little screw. Now we want to snug it up. Snug it. Do not put it in there with a death grip. You don't want it loose, but you want it snug, okay? Now we gently kind of wiggle it and bring it all the way to the top. Now, I want to bring it all the way to the top. Take my mainspring, set it in, and I want to put thumb pressure holding it that way and push straight down. See how easy that slid in? Now, putting my thumb inside the frame, I push down on the mainspring until I can put my finger up here on the hammer and push down on the hammer. The screw hole will line up. Taking the big screw, put it in there, push down on this tab with your thumb, with your finger, that kind of back of the hammer, in, and wiggle, and it should go in if you're not on camera. Right there. Just a little bit of a wiggler. There we go. Why did you line it up tonight for me? Okay, now we put the mainspring in, Putting my thumb on the inside, I push down on it so that it drops underneath the hammer. With this finger, I squeeze down, holding the frame and holding the hammer in position. Now you can take the spring, the screw, and put it in. Sometimes you got to put your thumb in here and put a little pressure on that main spring to make it line up properly. And you got to just look through the holes sometimes and get it there where she needs to be. Because you look in there and it looks like, oh yeah, it's going to drop right in. Now, if it's giving you a pain in the butt, take the rammer and do this. And the rammer will hold the main spring to where you can align that pin. Just like that. Now tighten up the main spring. Excuse me. Now tighten up the hammer screw. Tighten that up good and tight. Now, gently make sure that it's rolling correctly. Okay. And changing back to that little tip. Setting up. I want to take the bolt, drop the bolt straight in. Just like that. Now take the hammer. Now take the trigger and slide it in like that. Now take the one spring, lift up on the trigger, wiggle it a little bit till it lines up. Push her through. The Remington to me is tougher to get back together because you got to line up all this stuff. And unlike the Colt that allows you to easily line it up, it doesn't automatically line up. So it's a little bit of jiggling no matter what you do. Sometimes you can just about, there we go, have to dig out a pin to get it to line up. Okay, trigger and bolt screw going in. Snug it up. Make sure that main spring, that main screw is snugged up. Now turning it up, take out the big screw that holds the trigger spring. Take the trigger bolt spring, make sure you put it on top of the shelf on the trigger. That trigger has that shelf there, and that spring goes on top, not under it. Push it toward the front till it lines up and drop in the big screw. Put that home. A little bit of a balancing act sometimes to get it to go right like you want. The Remington is just a little more finicky about how it goes back together than, say, a Colt. It does, you just got to get it there. Alright, come on. Line up. There we go. Snug it up real snug and then back off just a grunt. So it gives that spring just a little bit to go. Alright, now that little bitty spring that goes in the grip, put it in there. This puts pressure on the main spring. I like to take it to where she stops and then back it off one turn. Like that. Now, cock it. Come off another half turn on that. That's to adjust for a weak spring. It puts stress on the spring here to add more tension. We don't want it so heavy that it's hard to cock, but we don't want it so light it won't set off caps. Now taking out the trigger guard screw, return the trigger guard. It has a shelf here in the back, so drop it in over the trigger and then down. Put back in the trigger guard screw. Snug it up. Base pin screw and loading lever. Slide in the loading lever. And then lift up and line with a loading lever base pin screw. Drop it in. Tighten her up. Snug that thing up good. Base pin down. Loading lever locks good. Grip screw. Lock in the front of the grip to the frame. Set up there in position. Give her a little tap. Turn her over. Lock in the front first. Line her up. Give her a little tap. Drop in the screw. Snug it up good. Now, on these grip screws, don't put the fear of God to it. Don't bear down. Because it's two washers and a hunk of wood running through a big open space. You can bow the grips in. It should be real snug so it doesn't move. But don't do like that or you'll crack your grips. Okay, bring the half cock, lock lower the cylinder. Now just like the Colt, make sure that the cylinder mouths are not burred up, that the center arbor is not burred up, that the bolt stops right here don't have any burrs in these individual things. Now the ratchet on the Colt is raised. On the Remington it's countersunk down. So just make sure this deck right here is nice and smooth. Now, as a bonus, we talked about the safety. Let me show you a lot better this safety notch idea. Okay. Here is a safety notch. See how this part of the shield rises up? What happens is the hammer comes down and hits that before it's fully into that notch. And so when you sit the hammer down on the safety notch, it actually sits on this shelf and it can just slide sideways. These two ears don't grip the hammer enough because that shelf is in the way. What I've done here is I've taken a mill bastard file that has a sharp edge. I've set it in that and I've done this until I have cut that shoulder. I hope you can see that really well. That shoulder down. Now what happens is the hammer fully seats in between these two ears, and it has clearance right here so the bottom of the hammer sits. Now you don't want to file off the bottom of the hammer, because what happens is at full down, the bottom of that hammer is just slightly past the bottom of that nipple right there. The actual face of the hammer is probably, halfway between that bottom and right there. So if I was to file off the bottom of the hammer to fit this, it would be hitting the bottom edge of the nipple and not giving me good solid ignition. It would also probably allow caps to split and I'd get a lot of blowback. So I don't want to move any of the hammer face. That's the reason I chose to file right here on this part of the shield of the ratchet to allow the hammer to fully seat. And I intentionally picked so that the proof mark on the cylinder would be at the holding the gun, the 2 o'clock position. So I'm going to put the gun back, the cylinder back. I come in from the right side of the frame. I put it in and I give it a slight rotation. That allows it to lift that hand up on the far side. Then I get holding it with my fingers, slide in, closed. Full cock, let down. We're back in business. Now, that safety notch we were talking about. I'll give you a little demonstration. This first safety notch right here has not been modified. Okay? I want you to notice. See this gap right here? The hammer is not fully down. It's sitting on that shelf right there. It's not fully down. Because of that, if there's any sideways motion, it drops down onto a cap. Just effortless almost. Now this next one is the one that I've modified, and I know that because my proof mark. I bring it up and I lock it into that one. Now notice that the hammer is down in the notch, and now you can't turn the cylinder. That's what Remington intended it. So now if I was going to carry 6, I put it into that notch, click, and it's rock solid. My hammer's fully down, everything's set. Now there's several that have, PM in, etc. and said, but Blackie, it's never safe to do that. And I agree with you. But in target shooting or whatever, when I'm going to be shooting, a lot, I load 6 and I put it down in that notch. Because it's going to be in a holster with a flap. And anything that would cause this cylinder to rotate, it cannot rotate now by a slight turn of the cylinder. Anything that would make the hammer come back far enough for the cylinder to rotate is exactly the same amount of force it would take for the hammer to come back and the cylinder to rotate on an empty. So we're back. Okay, I know this is a long video, guys, but you asked for a breakdown of the 58. I hope this helps you. I'm Blackie for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.